Hi everyone. So this week in collection development, this is sort of the junk drawer week of things. We're going to cover patron-driven acquisitions, floating collections, and then different types of non-traditional collections that we might have in the library. Um, so I just wanted to make sure that you know about patron-driven acquisitions, about floating collections. Even if you never use them, it's important to be knowledgeable about what they are. Um, and there'll be many more things coming up in the future going in this direction. So part of the curriculum is to make sure that you know these things. So patron-driven acquisition. So way back, say 30 to 50 years ago in libraries, before ebooks and online services. Mostly a library was a giant collection of knowledge, right? And people had to come to the library to get knowledge. But these days, with online sources all over, it's not quite as much the case. So, whereas before, a librarian would collect all the classics, all the great works of literature, um, items to have just in case somebody might want to research on that subject. Today, especially in public libraries, but also in academics and school libraries, we focus more on just-in-time services because of the internet and because many sources are available in other places. We don't have to have everything anymore. We don't feel like we have to have everything. So we can cater a little more to what people are interested in. Do we buy the classics? Yes. Do we still have a balanced collection with some good sources? Yes. But there's more room for patrons to ask for items and in some cases decide what we're going to buy. So with patron-driven acquisitions, which is also known as demand-driven acquisitions or DDA, what happens is usually a library, when they're first testing this out, will decide on a collection, a small collection that they want to try this out. You're not doing this with the whole library. So for instance, Chicago Public Library did, I believe it was ebooks and romances, but don't hold me to that. Um, they wanted to see what people wanted. So what they did, especially with ebooks, it's easier because it's with an ebook you can buy it right then. With a print book it'll take a couple of days. So there's a difference between e and print as well. But say you're getting a new collection of poetry in your branch and you have some of the basics, but you don't know what people are really interested in. So what you could do is offer a PDA for the poetry collection. So you could download the MARC records for a collection of poetry books from your vendor and download the records, but not buy the material until somebody requests it. And once they request it, that triggers a buy. In the case of an ebook, it'll be pretty seamless and they'll have availability to the ebook. In the case of a print book, they'll have to wait a couple of days for it to come to the library and be processed. But this way you can see what patrons are really interested in and what they really want. Of course, most libraries take requests. With or without patron-driven acquisitions, libraries take requests usually, and each library has a different system of say you put a limit on how many requests a person can have a month or a week or whatever, because inevitably in every library there's that one patron who will request everything, and they usually have one interest like Star Trek books or more obscure books that not a lot of people are going to want to read, but this one person is going to request like one a day if you will let them. So there has to be limits sometimes. So when you're interested in doing this with the PDA, you can look at your ILL requests as well. And we haven't covered ILL yet, interlibrary loan, but we will next week. And we'll segue into that from this week. But patrons often will request interlibrary loans for things that you don't have, and you can look at the record of that because you are keeping records of what people are requesting, and that way you can see what people have been asking for, and you can use that as a starting point for PDA. So you make the records visible in the catalog. They purchase when it the user wants it. That way you can find out what users are interested in. That can shape your buying from there forward. So it has a lot of benefits to it, and it is, it's a way to test out without buying a bunch of materials that you're not sure people will want. So that's another thing that's really good about PDA. So floating collections. Floating collections are where you have multiple campuses or multiple branches in a library, and the items don't have a specific home in one location. Normally this is done for again, not for the whole collection, all of the collections, but for just maybe one collection or certain items that you will do. Academic libraries can do that across campus. Public libraries can do it in multi-branch locations. I was looking for an instance of where school libraries might have done this, but I couldn't find one, although I am interested to know how that would work. If you say you're in Williamson County School District with several high schools, several middle schools, several elementary schools, would it be possible to do some sort of floating collection? Some of the benefits of floating collections are that it gives more of a variety of what's available because you can change it up. That item is not always stuck in one location if another location might see more use. Also, it can be more cost effective because you don't have to have one item in each branch, but it can float around as needed. Some of the drawbacks would be, again, having to move items from one location to another. How are they going to get back and forth in a timely fashion if somebody needs it? And then if someone quickly looks in the catalog and thinks it's at the location they're going to, but it's not, it's in a different spot. And that can be a little tricky. You'll have to just do some patron education in that way so they'll learn how the system works. So basically that's floating collections. So now on to some of the other non-print book materials that you might collect. For instance, periodicals. All libraries have some sort of periodicals, whether it's scholarly journals or popular magazines or something in between. And in the past, they've always been in print, and now there's many available in online formats. There are online formats, obviously, at the university level, because you've been looking at some of those. There are also some online periodicals available at public libraries. For instance, many public libraries offer digital magazines today, popular magazines, through an app called RB Digital. And RB Digital provides full color spreads, so it's kind of like a glorified ebook, but it's in color, and you can flip the pages just like you would in a book. So those are popular. But most libraries do have some sort of print periodical collection as well. So you have to decide several things when you have one of those. Are you going to allow those to check out? A long time ago, it really wasn't popular to check periodicals out at all, but recently a lot of libraries are going to that to increase usage rates. And so a lot of libraries do circulate periodicals. How long are you going to keep them? How many years are you going to keep them? Because you've got space issues with the print copies. If you want, say for instance, the New York Times which I know it's a newspaper, but it would go in the same area. How many years are you going to keep in print? And then I assume that you have a database that's going to cover the New York Times, but most databases really are only from the 80s, 90s, 2000s up to the present. So if you want the full run of a periodical, you need to consider what years you have in print, what years you have in uh, database, and then maybe you have print now, and then a database covers the last 20, 30 years, and maybe you have print from before that. Um, as we go more digital and more databases come online, a lot of libraries have been ditching their print copies of periodicals, but then sometimes it turns into an issue for, say, you want to get a New York Times article from 1936 for some research project, and nobody has it because it's too early for a database. Um, and if you ditched all the print collections, then is it lost forever? Who has it? Who keeps it? In some cases, amongst universities, there's been agreements made of who will keep what, so that there is some university that still has copies of certain periodicals. So let's go into graphic novels. Graphic novels are relatively new. They're different than just comic book collections. And libraries treat them differently depending on the library. And there are graphic novels for youth as well as adult, as well as teen. And there are different levels of violence and sex in them. So you do really need to know what the content is and make sure that it's in the appropriate area. Another collection that is making a comeback in libraries are board games. Instead of just video games, which libraries have been collecting for a long time, board games that can be played in the library or checked out of the library, musical instruments, tools, power tools, meters, electricity usage meters. In Spring Hill, they do the Wi-Fi hotspot connection, which are really helpful for those who are going on a trip in the car or a business trip. Some libraries have seed collections, which are becoming popular. So, and I haven't even mentioned the audio CDs and DVDs, which most of you are familiar with. In children's areas, of course, you sometimes have puppets, you have books with book kits with the CD and the book to read along, and all sorts of other things in the children's area. So for each of these collections that you have, you're going to follow the CREW method for recommended, dates, if there are any for some of these special. Otherwise, you're going to have to make up your own rules for these because they're not covered in the CREW method. So what are your rules for these collections? Number one, you have to think about, is it going to be allowed out of the library? Is it going to stay in the library? Is there any sort of deposit? On a higher price item, does it need to have a deposit? Maybe a $50. There's a library, Avon Lakes Public Library up near Cleveland, I believe, checks out bikes because they're on a bicycle path and they require a deposit for the bike. They also needed to get insurance in case somebody has an accident with the bicycle. So there's unique things to consider with these other collections. How long is it going to be checked out for? How is it going to be checked out? With a lot of these other collections, you've got different pieces. How is the item going to be packaged safely, and how are you going to make sure that you have all the pieces back? That can make a big difference in how well you pack it, and pack it nicely where everything has a clear spot and everybody knows where all the pieces go, so that it doesn't take so long at check-in to make sure that all the pieces are there. I guess we've covered insurance for high-priced items, deposit. One other item I wanted to mention is also your website. As libraries increasingly have resources online, whether they're databases or just free online sources like a link to a dictionary, a thesaurus, or some other information source, don't forget those are also collections as well. And they need to be added to and weeded just like any other collection, or they will get stale. You'll have broken links. They just need to be evaluated. And with your website, some of the tools you could use, just like with databases, you could see how many people actually look at those links, how many clicks you get, how long they stay on the page. Things like that are available in analytics. Analytics online are available for databases, ebooks, the RB magazines. Anything that's online now has probably a reporting structure that you can see the usage in that system. It won't be in your ILS, but it'll be in the online system that you are contracting with. So don't forget your website as well. If you threw up a link for a science information source, don't leave it there for 10 years and not check it or add to it or anything. Make sure that you are curating those collections online as well as all of your print and non-print materials. So I think that's it for today. And I do want to, I haven't covered shifting, and I wanted to just mention that I'll probably do that at the beginning of next week, and how to, once you weed a collection, sometimes if you do a heavy weed, you've got a ton of space left, and maybe you have more space in one area than another, and that you find that you need to shift a collection. And so I will do a short video on how to do that as well. Have a great week.